welcome to the economics news on HM television. We started the news with today's headline. Today's headline are exchange rate, the World Bank, GDP per capita, macroeconomics, and the final, globalization. So on exchange rate, the price of the country's money in relation to another country's money. Exchange rate is fixed when countries use a gold or another agreed upon standard, and each currency is worth of the specific measure of the metal of the other standard. Exchange rate is floating when supply and demand or speculation set exchange rate. If country import large quantity of the good, the demand will be push up the exchange rate for the country, making import good more expensive to buyer in that country. As the goods become more expensive, demand drops, and the country's money become more cheaper in relation to other countries' money. The country goods become cheaper to buyer abroad. Demand raise and export for the country increase. World trade now depends on the managed floating exchange system, government architecture to stabilize their country's exchange rate by limiting imports, stimulating export, or devaluing currency. Now, on the World Bank, it's an international organization dedicated to provide financing advice and research to development nations to aid their economic advancement. The bank predominantly acts as an organization that attempts to fight poverty by offering development assistance to middle and low-income countries. Currently, the World Bank has two standard goals that it aims to achieve by 2030. The first is to end extreme poverty by decreasing the number of people living on less than $1 a day to below 3% of the world population. The second is increase overall prosperity by increasing the income growth in bottom 40% of the world's population. They are not a bank in the common sense. They are made up of two unique development institutions owned by 189 member countries. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the IBRD, and the International Development Association, the IDA. Each institution plays a different but cooperative role in advancing the vision of the inclusive and sustainable globalization. The IBRD aims to reduce the poverty in middle income and credit-worth poor countries, while IDR focuses on the world's poorest countries. Together, they provide the low-interest loan, interest-free credit, and guarantee to developed countries for the wide array of the purpose. They include investment in education, health, public administration, infrastructure, financial and private sector development, agriculture, and environmental and natural resource management. And now off to my correspondent George, who will talk about the GDP per capita.
So on GDP per capita is a measure of a country's economic output that accounts for its numbers of people. It divides the country's gross domestic product by its total population. That makes it the best replacement of a country's standard of living. If you want to compare GDP per capita between countries, you must use the purchasing power parity GDP. That creates parity or equality between countries by comparing a basket of similar goods. It's a complicated formula that involves a country's currency by what it can buy in that country, not just by its values as measured by its exchange rates. You can find every country's purchasing power parity GDP in the CIA World Factbook. China has the largest GDP in the world, producing $23.21 trillion in 2017, but its GDP per capita was only $16,600 because it has 4 times the number of people as the United States. It's the most populous country in the world, with 1.38 billion people. The countries with the highest GDP per capita are two of the top 10, Qatar and Brunei, are oil exporters, with small populations. These countries were fortunate enough to have a large, abundant natural resource that is not labor intensive to develop. Since 2010, three oil exporting countries, the UAE, Kuwait, and Norway, have dropped off the list. The other countries have worked hard to become regional financial centers. Low tax rates and friendly business climates have induced global cooperative headquarters to locate there. Financial services are also not labor intensive to develop, so the wealth can be generated and distributed among a small population. In fact, Bermuda has less than 70,000 people. The lowest countries per GDP per capita are eight of the world's poorest countries are in Africa. There are many theories as to why African countries are so poor. One of the most credible is simply because of their size. Small countries cannot build economies of scale. Unlike US companies, they don't have a large domestic market. They can easily use as a test market. Second, many African countries are landlocked, meaning they have no port. They must rely on neighboring countries to get all their goods to the market. That increases their cost, making their prices less competitive. Only two of the world's poorest countries are outside of Africa. Tokelau is an island in the South Pacific that just three villages. It's supported by New Zealand, and Yemen is in Western Asia. So in macroeconomics is a branch of economics that studies how the aggregate economy behaves. In macroeconomics, economy-wide phenomena are examined, such as inflation, price levels, rate of economic growth, nation income, gross domestic product, and changes in unemployment. The two main areas of macroeconomic study are long-term economic growth and short-term business cycles. Macroeconomics first came to be distinguished from microeconomics with the work of John Maynard Keynes and his arguments that macroeconomics aggregates can behave in ways quite different from analogous macroeconomic phenomena. So to understand macroeconomics, there are two sides to the study of economics, macroeconomics and microeconomics. As the term applies, macroeconomics looks at the overall big picture scenario of the economy. Much simply, it focuses on the way the economy performs as a whole, and then analyzes how different sectors of the economy relate to one another, to understand how the economy functions. This includes looking at variables like unemployment, GDP, and inflation. Macroeconomics develop models explaining relationship between these factors. Such macroeconomic models and the forecasts they produce are used by government entities to aid in the construction and evaluation of economic policy, by businesses to set a strategy in a domestic and global markets, and by investors to predict a plan for movements in various asset markets. On the other hand, microeconomics looks at the behavior of individual actors in an economy, like people, households, and industries. And now on globalization. Globalization is the word used to describe the growing interdependence of the world's economies, cultures, and populations, brought about by cross-border trade in goods, services, technology, flows of investment, people, and information. Countries have built economic partnerships to facilitate these movements over many centuries, but the term gained popularity after the Cold War in the early 1900s. As these cooperative arrangements shaped modern everyday life, this guide uses the term more narrowly to refer to international trade and some of the investment flows among advanced economies, mostly focusing on the United States. The wide-ranging effects of globalization are complex and politically charged. As with major technological advances, globalization benefits society as a whole, while harming certain groups. Understanding the relative costs and benefits can pave the way for elevating problems while sustaining the wider payoffs. Globalization creates opportunities for many countries to experience economic growth. Economic growth is the increase in the amount of the goods and services produced by an economy over time. It is conventionally measured as a percentage change in the gross domestic product, or gross national product. These two measures, which are calculated slightly differently, total the amounts paid for the goods and services that a country produced. As an example of measuring economic growth, a country that creates $9 million in goods and services in 2010 and then creates $9,090,000 in 2011 has a nominal economic growth rate of 1% for 2011. And now back to you, Hal.
Thank you, George, for the information. Thank you for watching economics news on EHM television. Goodbye, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.